a friend of mine, Aaron Taylor, former NFL player for Green Bay Packers, we were having this conversation about this exact question and how a lot of suffering for NFL players and Navy SEALs and kind of other high profile, you kind of have a job that gives you purpose. You have a good enough income and you feel like culturally praised. So you're kind of like checking all the boxes, right? And then when you don't have that anymore, it's like, what? Now what? I was like, hey, how are you? I'm Brian. I'm Navy SEAL. It's like you have something to say. You're right. That's what in society we're just so trained. Like, here? This is me. This is what I do. And so that identity with that doing, I think, is so hard to change into being. That you're just worthy. Who you are. It's your birthright to be a worthy individual, regardless of what you do. What you do doesn't make you more or less worthy.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a holistic counselor and first-year doctoral student studying acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the stories of inspiring humans who have discovered that elusive state of balance between the Western concept of success with more Eastern philosophies of inner knowing and spirituality. Think yin and yang and flow. Now, these two do not need to be separate, but I know firsthand how difficult it can be to reconcile them. As a Silicon Valley burnout SKP myself, teaser, I left the tech world after 10 years of a thriving career in product management. I want to share the stories that I wish I had heard when I was struggling to find that balance and flow myself. On this podcast, we'll cover topics on spirituality, authentic career and relationships, slow living, mindfulness, alternative healing, concepts from psychology, and stories of transformation via traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. We'll also provide you with the tools to truly integrate both sides of your yin and yang. My hope is that these interviews can inspire you to rethink your own approach to mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if you are struggling, find your way back to authentic alignment. So, sit back, relax, and ground yourself back home, my love. Now let's get started. Hello, my love, and welcome back to Nourish. I'm your host, Kasha, and this week's conversation is a bit different from my recent episodes. My conversation today is with Brian Call, a former Navy SEAL, serial entrepreneur, father, husband, and today a doctoral student studying traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. As you can imagine, this is a complete 180 from his past. So for those not familiar with the United States Navy, Sea, Air, and Land teams, SEALs are part of an elite unit within the military, which operates as a special operations force and a component of the Naval Special Warfare Command. If you've ever listened to Jocko Willink, linking his podcast below, who is a retired Navy SEAL officer and actually Brian's former boss, you'll know that the recruitment and training for this unit is known to be some of the most rigorous and difficult in the military. Their missions are very involved and extremely dangerous. This episode has so many themes, unique themes, and perspectives. We definitely get into Brian's process of becoming a Navy SEAL, how he went from military combat to studying traditional Chinese medicine, and why. We talk about the power of the mind and what it looks like to really separate that mind-body connection, the upsides that have enabled him as a Navy SEAL to do some of the incredible things he has done, but also the downsides and how that disconnection can really trickle down into other things like relationships and empathy and really connecting with civilians as he reintegrates. We definitely talk about trauma and PTSD, so offering a trigger warning for anyone for whom that topic might be sensitive. And we talk about a lot of tools for healing, from psychedelics, mindfulness, therapy, acupuncture, and more. Finally, we get into the topic of identity and what it looks like to recreate who you are after a high-profile role like that of a SEAL. So, what I find so awe-inspiring about Brian, who is a classmate of mine, is that if you ever meet him in person, you would never guess that he's completed over 80 combat missions, nor would you recognize at first glance how deeply he still works to heal from the trauma associated with his service. I truly feel like Brian is a living, breathing testament to the DAOist philosophy of yin and yang in balance. He talks about how this is a continuous process for him and how, although it is difficult, he is able to integrate the most intense, traumatic, and deadly experiences with the most gentle, beautiful, and connected perspectives. So before we dive in, because there is a lot to cover, I just want to take a moment to deeply thank Brian, other veterans, and those currently in the military for their service. I truly don't think words can express my personal gratitude. And without further ado, let's get into it and welcome Brian to the podcast.
I wanted to kick off with a question that I ask every single guest that I interview, which is, what are 3 words, non-work related or school related in your case, or I guess our case, that you'd use to describe yourself?
Curious, determined, and flexible.
Ooh, I like that. I have not heard any guest use those words before, so very original. All right. So, Brian, I'm going to jump right in here. Your past, you were obviously in the military, in a very intense division of the military. And then now we have recently met as we are part of the same graduate program at ACTCM, although you're sadly leaving and transferring. We don't have to talk about that because I'll just spend the next, hour crying about that. We don't want that to be the episode. But can you please share a little bit of like your history and your past and like, how did you come to be in the military? And then how did you transition out to get your doctorate in traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very curious. You're so interested in me. It's great. That's okay. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. I wanted to be a firefighter, and I was in the fire cadet program in my high school. And the year I graduated, 9/11 happened, and one of my uncles was a fireman, and the other uncle was a Navy SEAL. And so after 9/11, I was kind of able to feel the impact it had on the community that I was about to join, and it really impacted the first responders. And so something about that, I was 18 at the time, and I'm like, I want to do something to help and to support and to keep this place safe. So I decided to follow my other uncle and become a Navy SEAL. So then I graduated and quickly joined and went through that program. And I was 18. Like I said, I think I was 19 by the time I got through the beginning stuff. And I had been hearing since I was a small boy all these stories from my uncle about what it was like to be a Navy SEAL, but it was during peacetime. So it was a very different experience for me than what I had heard and all these stories and all the adventures of like skiing in Norway with the Norwegian Special Forces and skydiving in different places and getting royalty to royalty was inviting people over after the skydiving session to like have a couple of drinks. And it was like a very still intense. And there's a lot of stuff my uncle never talked about, but still very different experience. We kind of just hit the ground running.
Without, please share as much as you feel comfortable, but I'd love to hear your perspective on the training program and like what it takes to become a Navy SEAL.
It is very intense. And I think about it sometimes and I'm amazed that I did it, and then I remember having some older guys in my class, like I think one of them was 30, and I'm just like, hard to imagine kind of doing all that stuff at that age. So I'm really impressed with the older guys that are able to make it through. I think the average is about 25. So I was on the young end. I was like the youngest guy at everything. So I got, kind of got picked on for that. But also, I had the resilience of a young body, which was incredible. So easy to bounce back. But yeah, the training itself, I mean, it is very intense. It's kind of designed to weed people out for the most part. We started with like 163 people and we finished with 19 after Hell Week. And then Hell Week is like it's a week of hell. But it's just you stay awake for pretty much the whole time. You get a couple little naps, but they're terrible because when you wake up, it's very hard to wake up when you haven't slept for many days, and your body starts to shut down. You get extremely inflamed. All the skin in the inside of your mouth kind of starts to fall off. Everywhere that clothes are touching is chafed raw. So like the insides of your legs and your armpits and your waistband is kind of just like raw skin. It's very unpleasant, but I don't know. For me, what worked was kind of disassociation. I would imagine that this experience that I was going through was a memory that I was looking back on fondly in the future as with pride for finishing. And so that changed it. Like kind of, when you think back about not all traumatic events, but something intense that was miserable. Generally, if you look back on it like with a laugh and a chuckle and a smile, like, oh, remember that? It was amazing, and we did this, and it was crazy, and this happened. So it's like kind of going into that space mentally helped me to continue, just to keep going, putting one foot in front of the other. I get asked a lot, what's the toughest part of the training? And it's the morning, getting up in the morning because you're warm and dry. Not all mornings, but most mornings, you wake up and you kind of know what is coming. And so that's when a lot of people ring the bell. But when you quit, there's a bell you ring it. And then that kind of, then you're done. You can go get warm and dry and have some ice cream or whatever. And so that happens a lot in the morning because you're warm and dry and you got 18 hours of misery ahead of you. But yeah, so basically there's a 6-month block of training and there's 3 phases. You have just a kind of kick in the nuts phase, and there's a more diving phase, and then land warfare phase, 3rd phase. And so they each have their own challenges, and you do like a 4-mile run with boots and, fatigues, and the times get faster as you go through. So everything's getting harder as you go. So the swim times get faster, the run times get faster, the pull-up requirements to eat get more, and so it just keeps getting harder and harder, and your body, is getting tired. But and then after that, there's you're kind of training the entire time. You're a career trainer basically as a SEAL. You train and then go fight, and then you come back and you train, you go fight, and then you come back and you teach, and it's kind of that cycle. And then there's and then we once you get through the initial section, then there's another section, and that's like a little bit more advanced training. So you're actually learning things. It's not just like trying to get people to quit. So that's great. And then once you get through that, then there's I don't know if the pipeline's changed. When I went through, we were going to an Army school for jumping, skydiving. We had our own school for skydiving, but for regular parachuting was through the Army. And then I think it's different now. And back then when I went through, you had to, everything's changed. So it's a little bit different. You can go into the military to be a SEAL and there's a pipeline for you. It was different. It was kind of piecemealed together. You had to get a regular job in the fleet, like in the regular military. And then you could apply and go through the training. And then, once you get to your team, you have some say in what team you go to, but you also just get selected. And so I was originally going to go to SEAL Team 5, and then at the last minute, they needed more guys for 3. So then I got pulled over to SEAL Team 3, and that's where I stayed. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
A few things come up. I mean, off the bat, it's, I think a lot of us reflect on hardships in our lives and we're like, wow, we really pulled through. And this is not to speak to anyone. Everyone's story is so different, right? So what is difficult for one person may look so different for somebody else, and it's all perspective, right? But just like hearing the intensity of your experience, I mean, it just completely floors me. Especially knowing you now, by the way, context for the audience, like we are in class together, or we were last semester, and you are just such like a calm, relaxed, chill dude. Like to imagine you going through like a week of no sleep, like with that kind of intensity, like day after day after day, and to know that you went through, not just to think about you doing it, to imagine that you actually did do it. It just, I mean, again, complete appreciation for everybody in the military, like so much gratitude for their service, but also like it just up levels my perspective of what the human body is capable of, for better or for worse. So I have a question for you. Was there a moment in that kind of like crazy period of time where you felt like you wanted to ring that bell? I'm sure that there must have been, but like what pulled you through? Was it any one thing? Was it a couple of things? Like what made the difference?
My uncle is like my hero. He's like a legend to me, and he is actually a legend for good and for bad in the teams. And we have like there's regular SEAL teams, and then there's like a varsity squad of SEAL teams. Like, and he spent most of his career at the varsity squad, and was kind of known for just being a badass dude, a good team guy. And he pulled me aside before I went, and he looked me in the eye and he was like, "If you quit, I will kill you." And he's like a funny guy, and he's always joking around, but his like look, it was it was like I took it at my little 19-year-old self was like, it saw a different side of my uncle. And I'm like, okay, I guess I don't have an option. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that I didn't want to, I don't know. It was really, I believed him when he said that. I'm like, okay. So I didn't ever even entertain the option of quitting. I thought there were times when I'm like, I'm going to die if I keep going. I remember feeling that way, but I wasn't, I just didn't give myself or allow the option to entertain the idea that quitting was something that could happen. I thought that it would be either I made it or my body quit, and that was what stopped it. But my own will was not going to be a factor in my completion of this thing. So, and it worked.
I mean, I don't know whether to use that as not necessarily what your uncle said. I mean, it sounds like it propelled you forward, but just the concept of not even entertaining the option of failure, how powerful that is. Looking back on that, especially coming from the perspective of starting to learn about traditional Chinese medicine, balance, yin and yang, like how do you reflect on your state of mind and like your state of being throughout that period of time? I don't know if you've thought about it, but I'm curious.
Well, excuse me. The experience, it changes you in a very profound way. I think you start to see that how powerful your mind is, how powerful the human body is, and how limited the beliefs are that are held by the culture at large, and how inaccurate and just wrong they are, that we're taught that your body and mind are a certain way, and that you are essentially powerless over yourself and your situation a lot of times. And it's just not true. And I think that along with that break in the mind comes freedom and suffering, because now you're kind of different. You're like, your mind changes. You're a little bit different than people that you interact with that are not SEALs. And it took me a really long time to be able to kind of relate in a meaningful way to me with others. It's not that it wasn't possible, but there's this like a false sense of superiority that can happen. I think the ego kind of grows, and you like, I did this, so I'm better. or I did this and then my suffering is valid, so other suffering is not valid. And then as soon as you have that kind of idea in your mind, then it just increases suffering so much.
That is such a profound and wise perspective on what happens, because it's almost like a hardening that occurs, which makes you as a Navy SEAL, as a human being, in a way almost capable of almost anything, right? Like it feels that way when I think about what you described. It feels like you feel in a way invincible, but at the same time it's like, it sounds like a very lonely place to be. And I love that description of having the dichotomy of both freedom and suffering. So is that something that you experienced, and like how did you overcome it?
Well, I mean, I don't think you ever overcome anything. I think you kind of like learn how to cope with whatever you have. That's my current standpoint, and that could change. But I think I had this idea that there was a solution to everything, or that you could actually heal trauma. But I think now you can't actually heal completely as far as it's gone, but you can learn how to deal with it and learn what your triggers are and learn how to cope and learn how to find joy again, which is a challenge. But I guess, and then like, so the dangerous part of this knowledge that you gain as you go through this and kind of separate the mind and the body is that you can literally, not all SEALs, I think, but a majority of them, if there was a good enough motivation, could like sit in an ice bath until they died, or run until they died, or just continue until either you go unconscious, the warning systems that are, most people shut them down, you're able to override that. And it's sometimes necessary to save yourself and others and to get the job done. But then carrying that into the civilian world when you're not a SEAL this is for me was a huge source of suffering, and it's still something I have to work on to like relearn what is healthy, what is like an appropriate amount of exertion, what is like using your will in a healthy way, how even studying or whatever it is, like what's the balance of like, when do I need to take a break? When do I need to rest? Those signals get lost and confused. And then if you continue to just pound your body, then that shuts down and causes just complete suffering for us, because we're so identified with our physical body because of what we've got our physical body to do.
How did you, transition out of the military? Like you're in this world where it sounds like your entire mind has been reconstructed in many ways for some very powerful abilities, and other ways it is obviously causing suffering over time. But I'm curious, like, what did your transition look like, and how did you end up studying Chinese medicine? I would love to hear that.
Yeah, it's kind of a long road, but I'll do my best here, and I guess we can expand on anything you find interesting. I had a unexpected pregnancy that I was involved with my son's mother, and we were just very good friends. We weren't actually together at the time, and our relationship was, we decided we were going to be co-parents, to the best of our ability, and so we were doing that. But as being a SEAL, I think I figured out the only place I slept like for more than a month in the same bed was in Iraq over the 2002 to 2010 when I was in the military. And so, just to kind of like, you're gone all the time. You're training everywhere. And so my son's mother just did not understand what it was to be a SEAL, and just thought that I wasn't, doing my part to be a father. And honestly, the headspace you're in when you're a SEAL, it's kind of challenging to deal with domestic situations. You're just, I mean, me, I guess, maybe not everybody's the same, but it's just like there's not even time to deal with that stuff. It's like no one's dying, so it's very non-empathetic, I guess. You're just like, nothing is really wrong, everyone's healthy, and that's not a good way to deal with problems in that sense of just like, deal with it, everything's fine, we're healthy, we're alive, no one's shooting at us, like what's the big deal? Like, can't we just get along and have fun? Like and that's not how you resolve problems. so, so our relationship got very strained, and I went to my command and asked to be assigned somewhere where I could be home around my family more, to try to rebuild that relationship. And I got assigned to another training cell, which I absolutely loved. It was doing land warfare out in Nyland, and it was, in California. I didn't have to travel, but I ended up being out there more than I was on the road as a SEAL training. So it actually didn't help at all. So at the end of my enlistment, things had started to get really intense with our relationship. So I just got out to try and mend that relationship. Like, being a father to me is the most incredible, beautiful gift I've ever received on this earth. And there's nothing I value more than my role as a parent. I think it's given me the most joy, most beauty. It's helped in my healing. It's just been a very difficult and very beautiful experience for me. So, I had no idea what I was going to do when I got out. Well, that's not true. I had started a water company when I was in with a friend, and it's called Scent. And we have 11 patents right now, and it's just been kind of steadily growing. I'm not actively involved in the company. I'm just a passive shareholder at this point, but I had kind of thought I would be working in that. And so that was like a backup plan, but we didn't have the revenue and income, and I just wasn't in the space to be able to sit in an office and kind of manage that stuff at that time. So I actually got into doing stunts. So I started doing stunts and consulting for film, television, video games. I did that for about 9 years. And then I got hired for a musician. I've signed an NDA, so I can't say who, but it's one of the top names of our time, female musician, classic kind of, yeah. Anyway, she was a pleasure to work for. Very, very driven, hardworking individual. I learned a lot during that time. But I was pretty lonely living in LA or living in Beverly Hills at this mansion. Most of the time I was there alone with just the gardeners and the maid, and wasn't for me. So I made it for about a year. And then I did a little bit of anti-piracy work on ships, like cargo ships around the Horn of Africa. I think I did one trip there. We got chased by pirates, and it was me and 3 other SEALs. We had little like M4s, and the pirates have like rockets and like belt-fed machine guns mounted on all their ships. And and I'm just like, what am I doing? I'm like risking my life for somebody's ammonium nitrate on this cargo ship. So I realized, like, contracting was not for me. It was one thing to risk my life for my boys and, like, doing the work for the country, and having that sense of purpose. But then for the just doing it for money was like super not fun. So I didn't continue in that area. What else did I do? And I kind of just all over the place, right? I'm like, I want to be in service again. So I was started taking EMT classes and was going to go back into the fire service. And during the while I was in the process, I had a spontaneous pneumothorax, so my lung collapsed, actually. And it was during a dry fast that I was doing. I was on the 3rd day of a dry fast, and I was like doing some chanting, actually, mantra with my wife in the morning after a little yoga, and I felt like this crazy pain in my back. Felt like I'd been stabbed. And then I told my wife, and she's like, I'm sure you're fine. Just so I waited a couple more days. But then it got to the point where I could like move around, and I could feel my lung tissue kind of just like flopping around inside. And so I drove myself to the ER, and they took a chest x-ray, and then immediately did a chest tube, and I had to have a surgery, and they repaired it. That actually really scared me, because I rely on my breath so much for meditation to manage PTSD and just anxiety and depression and all these things. Meditation has been like a life changer for me. And so to lose the breath, to not be able to breathe, not be able to take a full breath, or to just feel like, because I had air kind of filling the intercostal space. So it was starting to be very difficult to breathe because there wasn't enough room. And so that is like the one thing that I had is the breath. And so to lose that was absolutely terrifying. And I think what happened after that is I realized how I wasn't actually managing my symptoms, or like dealing with trauma, or dealing with, there was just a lot of undealt with things. So then once I healed up, I kind of had heard about psychedelic therapy. And so that's when I kind of went down that path, and I started participating in psychedelic therapy, and found that very helpful to kind of get into some of those things that were kind of below the surface that I didn't really realize that I was just carrying around and holding. But through that practice, or through that process of kind of getting back into like a different healing modality, some of these techniques and practices in that field, I mean, there's also just all kinds of random people giving out psychedelics without any experience. So you got to be careful. But some of the traditions in that and those healing modalities are very, very old, and they're kind of untouched, and there's no one profiting from them. It's just like something that works, that helps. It's helped warriors throughout history, for a long time. And I just found that so interesting. And I've always been very interested in the body. And I think once the firefighting was no longer an option, because you got to wear the SCBAs, and it's very physical, and the surgeons recommended I stay away from anything. No more scuba diving or skydiving, anything that's going to change the pressure of the lung. So I was pretty bummed, actually, to kind of, again, being so identified with my physical body, and to have it like failing on me was very challenging. But then, I had acupuncture experience, or I've been to acupuncture in the past, and it's been super helpful for me. And actually, before I went to the ER, I went to my acupuncturist, and she like put the needles in the lung points. And as soon as she put the needles in, I could breathe again. I could take a full breath. And she's like, "You do need to go to the doctor." I'm like, I'll give it one more day and see if this solves itself. But I did. Then I went, but I was just kind of amazed, because I never really gave too much thought. I just seemed like, I don't know, I didn't really believe in it, or like it seemed just too strange coming from like a Western mind. But the pain that I experienced when my lung did collapse, I explained the pain, a sensation to the acupuncturist, and it was like textbook lung meridian pain that I was feeling in my arm, like all the way. The entire meridian was lit up with pain, and it's the lung meridian, and so I don't know, it's just so interesting to me. And so, yeah, then that's kind of what brought me to acupuncture.
I thought that my story was interesting because I did move from like English major into tech, which is pretty unusual. And I like thrived there for 10 years. But the late nights, hard work compared to like this entire narrative that I just got, I feel like, you know what, I can rest easy. My essence has not been completely depleted. Essence in Chinese medicine.
Well, let me just say, so I think in my experience, that idea of like your story compared to my story is different or better or more interesting. That is such a source of suffering for me personally, to have that in my mind of like, I have trauma from war. This person has trauma from returning a pair of shoes at the mall. My trauma is more valid than that other person's trauma. It's like that whole mind trick is very difficult to break. But when you can accept all suffering as valid, it's so freeing, and you're allowed to heal, and you're also allowed to not heal. It's just like a freedom. But that, I mean, it goes back to a long time ago, thou shalt not judge. It just really causes, in my own experience, so much suffering.
So I actually wanted to ask you about this because when you brought it up earlier, we didn't get a chance to dive into it, but you just brought it up again, this notion of suffering and like kind of that comparison and causing, difficulty in like connecting with other people because, their trauma is returning their shoes to the mall while, you just had an experience of not sleeping for a whole week or like, actually fighting to survive. What was really pivotal for you? If you can think of, it could be any number of things, but like what really helped shift that perspective for you?
Meditation, like 100% meditation. I started with TM, Transcendental Meditation. It's a great start. It's a good sit-stay meditation. Teaches you the practice of sitting and staying still and seeing what's going on inside, under the hood of your body and your mind, basically. This simple explanation: your heart pumps blood. It's its job. If it stops pumping blood, you die. Your mind pumps thoughts in the same way. It's a biological, evolutionary survival mechanism that we have to try and solve problems. And so the mind is trained and evolved to present problems and solutions. And so it's just constantly doom, 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 just like the heart, boom, 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 thought, 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 thought. What happens is with trauma or just with socialization in general, if it's not, carefully curated, your thoughts and your solutions are skewed towards terrible things, towards yourself, towards others. And so this like kind of deluge of thoughts that's just running around in there unchecked can cause tremendous suffering. And it takes a long time to like start to realize that. And it doesn't go away, but you can challenge it. You can challenge the thoughts of like, oh, I've heard that thought before. Is that true? And then it's like, so, I mean, you can approach it from so many different angles. There's the Western, or there's like the spiritual side of meditation and all the energetics of that. And you can spend your whole life going down those paths. There's so many different traditions from, yoga and Kung Fu and even in TCM, and then there's the physical, what we're learning now that's backing up all these things of how if you have trauma, you're, especially as a child, repeated trauma, it changes the brain and the way that it looks from like a brain scan, right? The communication is different from different parts. Certain ones are stronger or weaker. The gray matter is different. There can be the prefrontal lobe has a different communication with or without trauma. And then, but what also is really cool is that meditation, successful meditation, getting into the space of it, it changes from a brain scan. It changes your brain if you do it. And when you stop meditating, it changes back. So I notice in myself, it's not the answer to everything. And sometimes you need other help and other support of others, community, and, all kinds of different things. It's a good start though. And it can kind of help to see what's going on. So, I mean, definitely that's been the key. Even with, I think with psychedelic therapy, it's so popular right now and it's being used in all these different ways. And it's like, it's not a cure all and it doesn't fix anything, but it does help to see where you can go if you do the work, the internal work that you can do in meditation. But I think for me, meditation is better and more potent and more healing. It just takes longer and it takes effort and it takes commitment and it takes diligence. And it's something you have to do every day. And if you don't, you start to move back to where you were when you started. It is like a layering effect. The more you do it, the you can't unknow what you know, so to speak, as one of my teachers says, Diana Lang. But you can slip back and kind of get back into those patterns of suffering. And then you get to sit back down and meditate again. So I'm clearly a big fan.
I love that you called out explicitly how psychedelic therapy is one of many tools that you can use to get to know yourself better. Because I don't know if this resonates with you, but when I look out at all the cures, options for healing yourself that are out there, very frequently I feel like we kind of fall into this kind of have these blinders of, all right, what I need is psychedelic therapy. I will take this drug or, kind of undergo this treatment and I will be healed. But like healing is a process. And I just love how you called out earlier in our conversation that I think you said that you cannot heal trauma. It's something that you can learn to deal with or work with. And I totally agree with you about, the power of meditation. As a meditator myself, I've found, firsthand so many healing benefits of like just connecting with yourself, honestly. And I think it is my fiance actually called out that in many ways, psychedelics help accelerate what you would get to with meditation. So it is kind of a slower but ongoing process, because I think it's also important to call out for people out there who don't necessarily feel like, let's say, psychedelic therapy is the route for them. Like there are other options on, this like spiritual journey and this healing journey. And I love that you call that out. So, question for you, what is your spiritual practice, meditation practice? What does that look like today?
Today, I'm working with heart rate coherence a lot. So it's like it's heart math is a good source of information, and it's basically, let's see, simplest way to explain it would be the two fight or flight or rest and digest. So when you're in fight or flight, your heart rate is very steady. It's kind of like doom, 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 kind of getting everything ready. Your hormones are changing. And with, people that have experienced trauma can be in kind of a low grade fight or flight all the time. And it changes your bone structure, your pelvic, the relationship of your bones and your pelvis change, your jaw structure changes. It's like kind of the my wife's pregnant right now, so like her body is changing too, and the hormone release, creates more flexibility, and the ab muscles change, and her, physical structure is actually changing because of the hormones, right? And so when you're in fight or flight, or for a long time, you could have like a severe back pain, and you think it's from an injury or from a kidney problem or whatever, and it could be simply from being in fight or flight for too long and having, the bone structure change in a way that it creates, pain in like the the iliac, or the what is it called?
Sacroiliac joint.
Yeah, exactly. When you're in rest and digest, your heart rate varies. So when you inhale, it speeds up. When you exhale, it slows down. So you can actually like put your hand on your wrist and feel your pulse and breathe, and you can notice the rate of change. It's, very low tech way to do it. But if it's not changing that much, you're kind of activated and you're in fight or flight. And if there is a big change when you're breathing, then your parasympathetic is more activated. So it's pretty cool. But basically, heart rate coherence, you breathe on 5.5 seconds per breath. And so your inhale and your exhale are the same, and it helps your body to return into that rest and digest mode. So you're kind of retraining your body. And so for me, my fight or flight can be so strong that it actually affects my respiration, my breathing. It feels like I'm kind of breathing through a tube. I'm super sensitive because of the lung collapse, and I've seen different doctors and chiropractors, and I found one that's kind of, this is his focus, is this kind of balance between the rest and digest and fight or flight. And so heart coherence breathing, it's just, you listen to a tone. I can send you some if you want to link to it, but you basically just put it on, listen, and breathe with the sound. And then I have like this thing I clip to my ear, and it has all the data, so you can see how deep you're getting into parasympathetic or sympathetic and where you're at. And then, yeah. So that's like the physical nuts and bolts of current. I change all the time. I'm always trying new things. Like I've done TM for years. And then my Diana Lang, you can link to her. She has incredible meditations. They're very more on the spiritual side, which I think is beautiful. But any sitting, breathing practice, I think is great. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I do, like today I did 30 minutes. I've been doing about, because I was sick, so I was doing extra, like 3 hours a day. But I've been trying to do an hour in the morning and an hour at night, and just to turn down the node, because school stress and life stress, and it's like, for me now, I can easily get activated and the stress response, even without really knowing why or what's causing it. And so then, having these practices helps. It's really helping my breathing, and it's helping to retrain the body to kind of chill out, man. Everything is okay right now. Like everything is good. Look around. So, and I think I did a big research project on this, actually, kind of trying to capture metrics from my own mind. And one of the things that I think is helpful is like to notice how much of the beauty of life you can see around without trying. Like if you just sit and like, are you noticing the beauty of life and seeing the miracles that are happening all the time, all around, just everywhere? And that's like the space I try to stay in, and it doesn't, I don't stay there, but I'm coming back to it more than I ever have, and the times of, I guess this is that's so interesting with trauma. It's like nothing in the external environment could change, and everything could be terrible, and like not wanting to continue living. And then something can change, and now nothing in the external environment has changed, but the beauty is there. You can see the beauty and the miracle and the wonder. And I started to notice this because your mind will tell you, I need to get a different job, I need to get a different partner, I need to move to a different place, I need more time for myself, I need this or that. If I could lose weight, or if I could gain weight, or if I could do this or that or whatever, I'll be happy, or I'll feel good. But then when you start to pay attention, you'll notice that the feeling good is not related to the external environment. It's actually, it seems to be elusive, and like, who knows where it comes from, at least for me. But then I have also been around a lot of explosives. So like can have neural inflammation. So my diet can change, and I can feel everything is terrible. And it's not actually, nothing has changed. But all of a sudden, all I see is all the problems, all of the fears, all the things to worry about. And then, meditation or some other magic that happens. And then, oh, I see the beauty of my wife, and how lucky I am to be alive, and how incredible my house is, that like the day before I was thinking was a horrible place, and I needed to do all this work, and blah, 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 and so it helps to notice these things. And for me to be able to like get the habit of returning to the beauty of life, and that then you don't need any external situation to change. But it does, the external.
Amen to that. I mean, it is so incredible to have you reflect on this experience that in many ways, honestly, I think is human. Like, it just is so human. Everything you just described, minus the stimulation from explosives, I can relate to, right? Like, but everybody, I think, can relate to just that, the importance of kind of cultivating your inner garden, because that is something that we can help influence. Like, our outside surroundings may not always be within our control. And I think you just put it so beautifully. One thing I did want to actually ask you about, as a veteran, you speak so eloquently on these amazing tools that have helped you come back to balance. It sounds like it's an ongoing process. Do you feel like other veterans, other people who have gone through similar experiences that you had from the military, who might be in the military right now, who are leaving, what kind of advice would you want to give to somebody else who is suffering through, that kind of trauma, or any other kind of trauma that, you've now discovered? It looks like meditation is one of them, but are there any others that you would like to share with people who are going through kind of healing from these traumatic experiences?
I think building a team of support, if you have the means to do that, and there are a lot of programs out there that can help. You have to just keep trying. I think, like, I've worked with veterans and civilians, and in coaching in different ways, and it seems like the ones that do get to a place where they feel they can function, like their quality of life is adequate, it is to continue to try. Like what works for me may not work for someone else. I think meditation is like kind of a catch-all that's been around for who knows how long, but I mean, there's records as old as records as we have, is, there's meditation mentioned. And so I think having a team, talking to somebody, and then continuing to try. Don't give up. Keep trying, and notice your behavior. If you're drinking and having sex all the time to like kind of, or doing drugs or whatever it is to like, numb the pain, that's like a sign of nothing wrong with you. There's just probably some undealt with trauma. And I think there's so much shame and guilt that we can put on ourselves for our behavior when the behavior is just reflecting the internal space. And so I think if there are behaviors that you're really hard on yourself for, to think about it in a different way and just to try doing other things, continue to try. And I think, I've never met anyone that couldn't benefit from meditation. It just seems like it is probably the hardest thing you could ever do in your life, to have a consistent practice with it. And it isn't the solution to everything. I've been in tough spots where meditation, wasn't enough. And I thankfully I actually have a SEAL. He's a former SEAL who's also a PsyD, a doctor of psychology that I've worked with, has been very helpful for some things. And then, I've two other teachers I've worked with, a shaman for, it's not a shaman in the sense of the word referring to someone from Asia in a certain time period, but I know the term is very loosely used now, but a healer in the indigenous ways, that's trained with many different kind of native tribes in different areas, and has helped me tremendously just to change my brain, change my mind, change my agreements with suffering. We make so many agreements with suffering since childhood, and so like you have to kind of break those, and it's not easy, and you need a team to do it. But I guess if you just keep trying, keep looking, and connect with what you believe in, pray. Whatever that is, to ask for the help that you need, and it will just show up. It comes in the most unexpected ways if you look, if you seek. I think it takes, in those dark times, it's very tough to get the motivation. So I think that's where the community comes in, cultivating a supportive community. And that is difficult, but it's like, you got to just keep trying. And then stuff starts to work, and things start to like, eating this different way, it's reducing inflammation in my body, it's helping my brain, my memory is coming back a little bit, or whatever, and you just start getting these little hits of joy and of peace, and then you can start following those kindly and curiously, and it'll just keep opening up and leading to more things. And and I think realizing it's never gone, it's never healed, it's never fixed, there's no place to get to that's like, okay, I did it, I healed myself, awesome, I can now take a break. It's just a process of finding tools that support your joy and noticing, what is not supporting my joy. Alcohol is not, I've not seen that be helpful for anyone in my situation. If anything, that's like one of the biggest, I've lost a few friends to suicide, and it was always drinking was involved, so I'm like not a big fan. I think it's the worst thing, but it's culturally accepted. Why, it doesn't make sense to me, but there are people, anyway, it's a whole nother story. But I think staying sober is very helpful, and, but psychedelics can be super helpful too. It's just in balance, like we talked about, using that as it can become another addiction. It can become another escape, another thing to avoid dealing with the underlying issue, so then kind of like using it as a tool, but then doing the work to grow towards joy is very important.
The concept of identity, right? Like, when we started off this podcast, I specifically asked you to introduce yourself using 3 words that were unrelated to work or what you do or what you're studying at all, right? Or what you did, in order to kind of move away from that. But like in our society, we are like so defined in many ways. At least I find this to be true. I don't know if this resonates, by like what we do is who we are, right? I am a product manager that works at Microsoft, or I am a doctoral student at ACTCM, whatever it might be. You know, you have redefined yourself so many times. When you think about like kind of where you are now and what you're doing now, and how do you reconcile those two very different, almost like yin and yang parts of your life? Like, do you feel like, they're coming together? Like, what is your experience when you look at, your past and your present and where you're going? Like, I don't know, it's like almost an esoteric question, but, when you think about like your identity and like reconciling these two parts of yourself, like, how do you feel about them today?
This is such a good question. I mean, I think we could talk about this for an hour easily. I have so many thoughts popping up that I want to share, but I'm going to try to like simplify, which is not a strong point of mine. But I was a friend of mine, Aaron Taylor, former NFL player for Green Bay Packers. We were having this conversation about this exact question and how a lot of suffering for NFL players and Navy SEALs and kind of other high profile, you kind of have a job that gives you purpose. You have a good enough income and you feel like culturally praised. So you're kind of like checking all the boxes, right? And then when you don't have that anymore, it's like, what? Now what? I was like, hey, how are you? I'm Brian. I'm Navy SEAL. It's like you have something to say. You're right. That's what in society we're just so trained. Like, who here? This is me. This is what I do. And so that identity with that doing, I think, is so hard to change into being that you're just worthy who you are. It's your birthright to be a worthy individual regardless of what you do. What you do doesn't make you more or less worthy. That concept is foreign. Like it's not part of our culture. It's not part of our socialization process. It is the opposite. You're valued only by what you produce, how you look, what all this other stuff, which then I think then motivates people to make choices that are not in their own highest good, not in their own. And this is something I struggle with tremendously because like you identify when you have an ego boost of a career, even if it's just having a certain amount of money that you're like, you have a feeling of goodness, of like worthiness, of like, I did it. I completed this hard thing that other people have not completed. And so but then you can chase that around, and trying to replace that. And it's just miserable and horrible and suffering and so I think this is something that I can hear my mind doing that of like, I am, a white male in this society that has been blessed with genetic near perfection in certain ways to be able to complete this type of, very rigorous situation. And I have like a very high intellect and blah, 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 all these things. So I have to like perform in a certain way to be valued in society. And those thoughts are there. But like, so, it's something I deal with. I think we all deal with it. And when I can be connected to my joy and be in that space of seeing the beauty, like the idea of being an acupuncturist and helping others. And like, I'm so curious about the body and how it works. And it's a beautiful thing. And then I can be in another place where I should be running a company, or I should be doing something that some of my friends are doing and making lots of money and having some other high profile situation. Like just serving others is not good enough for, blah, 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 all this story. And so it's like, I notice it just depends on the space I'm at, where I am. But ultimately, when I connect to myself, like I am most fulfilled helping others. I love supporting other people.
And I would just add to that I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. Like that, like the yin and yang, like the softness of, and I don't even want to say like softness of serving others, because even working as like a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner or acupuncturist, like there is business acumen that goes into that. Like there's both yin and yang, like hard work and like a gentleness that comes with being like working in a field that is, by definition, like respects principles that are perhaps more balanced than, say, working as like a stockbroker in like crazy hours, like, I'm thinking like Wolf of Wall Street kind of being the complete opposite. Like there are elements, as we've learned, of both in both. So those aren't mutually exclusive, but I just really, it's so interesting to have you reflect on this, because when you tell me about your struggle, I see somebody who embodies both, like you're saying, like on one side, like that serving others like feels so true to you, but then you feel the pressure of like being this high powered C, as though they're like, not both part of like who you are as a person, and it doesn't have to be in like the picture of like a high powered CEO, but like your voice and your story and your perspective. I've learned so much today. And like that kind of leadership and impact can come through in so many different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be on like polar opposite of the spectrum. Like you can have a bit of that opposition together in so many different ways.
And thank you for saying that. It means a lot. I really hope so. I hope my words can be helpful, And I do think it's trying to find balance, like really wanting to be balanced inside and outside in all ways. And I feel like the, Navy SEAL yang and the yin of acupuncture do kind of go well to complete that circle,
Absolutely. I actually, when I asked the question, that's kind of what I saw, right? The theme of this podcast is ultimately about those principles of balance. And so talking to you, I'm like, whoa, perfect example of like literally both opposite ends of the spectrum in balance. And I know it's a journey and you're getting there, but that's why I found this conversation so exciting. And also, just for what it's worth, everything you just talked about, especially in like the last couple of minutes, I can so resonate with, like as somebody who has changed her career as well. And, I just found your words personally to be deeply moving. This whole conversation was like really inspiring for me. I had intention without expectation, and it surpassed any expectation I could have had. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. Do you have, any last words or messages that you want to share with the audience? And also, can you please share where you would like people to come find you? And we'll, of course, link everything in the notes as well.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Really fun. Kind of like, said some things I've never said before in different ways. So I really appreciate you kind of like pulling that out of me. I do enjoy sharing, and it's just been a beautiful journey. I mean, I wouldn't change a thing, and there's been a lot of suffering and a lot of joy, and it's just, finding that balance. And I think the following curiosity and being persistent, that's like, you got to just keep going. Life is beautiful. And if you don't see that, then continue, and when it is beautiful, enjoy it, but don't hold on to it, because it doesn't last and it will not be beautiful again. And then you just continue, it's like a circle. It's like that, what we're talking about, that balance. I am pretty much a Puxatani Phil, what the groundhog that stays. I don't have a social presence right now at all. I've intentionally kind of been cultivating my own space, and I have no social going at this point. So there's really no way to get a hold of me or contact me. But if that changes, I'll let you know.
I love it. Well, I will encourage the audience to leave some awesome reviews and feedback on the podcast, and I'll definitely pass them along to my top secret friend, Brian, over here. Brian, thank you so, so much. Oh, you wanted to add one more thing? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I also I do have a pretty good network. So, I mean, I'm in Los Angeles. If there is any veterans or anyone that is having a tough time and tough moment, I'm happy to connect and to support and give my 2 cents for what it's worth on whatever I can to be helpful. So I think, just wanted to offer that. It doesn't have to be just suffering, I guess. If there's some other reason, I'm definitely reachable. So
Joy as well. That's good.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah. Well, it has been such an honor. Thank you so, so much. And to the audience, hopefully you feel as inspired as I do after wrapping up this podcast. Thank you, Brian, and see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Nourish. If you heard anything on today's episode that really resonated, please be sure to share it with your friend, the family member, or anyone who you feel might be able to benefit from the conversation. Speaking of connection, I am so eager to hear from each and every one of you. If you have a moment, please leave a review. I promise I read each and every one of them. And if you have any suggestions, tangible speakers, topics, etc., please check out the show notes. I've linked a Google Doc where you can submit some ideas there. Finally, in terms of connecting with speakers, I know that Brian doesn't have much of a presence online. So what we've done is I've actually linked a Google Doc where you can submit your information if you want him to get in touch with you. So go ahead and do that if you'd love to connect with Brian. And if you want to connect with me, learn more about holistic counseling or traditional Chinese medicine and the work that I do, please head over to my website at mirawellness.co or my Instagram, mira_wellness_co to connect. Thanks again for being a listener, and see you next week.